Hey everybody, Simone here, and I'm back with Bella and Timothy, and we're continuing our conversation of the body keys. So last time we ended up with several things that we wanted to continue the discussion on, the element of spirit, the element of exhaustion, and PHS. So, Timothy of the Body Keys, would you take us off, lead us off?
Oh, sure thing. We've got a lot that we're excited to talk about. The first thing that you mentioned was the elements, and in this case, the two of you share an element known as spirit. It's what I've entitled the element of spirit. So I think this is something that we were excited to explore together, since I know that the two of you had already kind of begun a bit of a journey of your own in exploring what this means for you. And then I kind of snuck in unexpectedly with the body keys, and it all kind of came together. So um, I want to go in that direction to begin with, if that's okay. Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay. So I guess what I should do to begin with is just kind of explain briefly what I mean by the elements within the context of the body keys and the body keys profile. So there are three primary aspects to every body keys profile. And those are, first of all, the stuckness patterns. These are the tension patterns that we find ourselves most likely to get stuck inside of. There are the body keys that serve to soothe or relax those patterns of tension. And then there are the gifts that emerge on the other side of relaxation. But kind of underlying these three primary elements are what I like to refer to as the elemental expressions. And these expressions are, you can almost perceive of them as filters, right? Or like, you know how we joke about wearing rose-colored glasses and you see, it changes how you see the world? Well, in this case, the elemental expressions are, there are a total of 6 options, and every profile has one of 6 options. And what this means is that depending upon which of the natural elements, which of the 6 natural elements your profile is exhibiting, all of the other aspects of your profile will feed through that filter. So that's what I mean by expression. Your body keys, your gifts, and your patterns will express themselves in a particular way. And that particular way is revealed by the elemental expression. So that's what we're referring to here when we talk about the elements. Now, the 6 natural elements are, starting at the beginning, the first option is earth. This is the most grounded of all of the elements. And we can talk more about each of these if you'd like, but for now, I'll just tell you what the 6 are. The first is earth. The second is water. The third is fire. The fourth is air. The fifth is ether. And the 6th, which both of you share, is spirit. And so you can get a sense right out the gate as you move through this sequence. And I did deliver them in a very specific and intentional sequence. The frequency of it is changing. They're becoming more sensitive. You know, earth is very grounded, and then water is more fluid. And as you move up, they become more and more airy in their quality until all of a sudden you arrive at spirit. And so there is not so much a hierarchy as a transitional movement as you become lighter and lighter and lighter and more subtle in the expression.
Do these relate to the lines in the gene keys?
They do, absolutely. They relate to the lines in the gene keys. They relate to the lines in human design, and they relate to the lines in the I Ching hexagrams. So all of these things have the same basic, like, foundational themes built into them.
Fabulous.
Great question.
So if you're joining us in this conversation, Bella had done an amazing session with Timothy, and she was so excited about it that she called me to talk about it. And so we were so entranced that we did a channeling with the archetype of the 6-line body spirit. Bella, where can people see that conversation if they're interested?
I think it's still to be decided. It's not up.
Okay, so we'll post everything connected so that if you are into the body keys, that you can see that conversation, and we hope to have more conversations with the archetypes. So Tim, thanks for grounding that in our our realm of human design, gene keys, and the I Ching.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's exciting to do that because nothing that arises in a vacuum. You know, each of us is learning from all of these sources, and I think each of us three is very much in that world where we're synthesizing from multiple different directions. We're open to learning, and not only learning, but integrating and allowing something fresh to emerge as a result. And so in my own experience, I'm taking from these systems and I'm living inside of them for, in this case, years. And then something new starts to show up. And again, in this case, it shows up in a way that's embodied. It's not so much a concept as something that can be felt. And that's why I really enjoy the elemental expressions, because they're directly connected to nature. There's something you can really get a tangible sense for. And so we use these like archetypal, this archetypal terminology of water and earth and fire and air and all of these things, but we all know what they feel like. You don't need to think too hard to recognize the difference between the explosive and dynamic nature of fire compared to like the rhythmic pulse of air, the movement that is air. They are very different in the quality of their expression. And so it's by utilizing this same kind of archetypal patterning or terminology that you start to get a real sense for how your body keys profile will taste.
Nice.
Now, you two share the most complex of all of the elements. I like to joke that my element of ether is my favorite and the most interesting because it's mine. But the sixth option, spirit, is the most complex. It's the most nuanced. Complex doesn't necessarily mean complicated. Once you get a sense for it, it takes on a life of its own. But there's a lot more happening here as you transition from earth up to spirit. They become not only more subtle, but significantly more nuanced and sophisticated in their expression. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, but I'm curious to know before I do if either of you has specific questions related to that element of spirit.
I feel like I just wanted to precise that when we speak about the six-line body, because some people might, not be that much into human design or the gene keys, we are looking at the design side of the body graph in human design, and we're looking at the radiance and the purpose in the gene keys. So that's the line when we speak about the line of the body, and that also then has the element in it. So if you want to relate it back to either human design or the gene keys, that's where we are going back and looking at. So for Simone and me, we are 4/6s. So that is and being a 4/6, I've always felt like spirit is there all the time. It's my to-go place when it feels like I'm in discord, either in the world, like in the big kind of Gaia body, or in my own body. So that's kind of how even Simone and I was speaking about the element before knowing how the body keys work. So I just feel like that's a good thing to have with us when we speak about the element of spirit.
Yes, that's perfect. I'm glad you brought that up because I know that a lot of our listeners are going to have a certain amount of history with these other systems. And so to be able to make those correlations could be useful. I love that the sixth line purpose in the gene keys is known as intent. That's correct, right? Yeah. And Richard Rudd talks about how we're dealing with like the electromagnetic emanation of the cells. It's like a cellular interaction, but beyond the cells themselves, it's their communication, this electromagnetic pulse. So I find this very interesting, the cell itself being this material object, so to speak, and then its way of interacting with the world as intent, which of course you can draw to intention. And all of a sudden, here we are yet again in the very subtle realms of our intention. And so you think about what it means to carry in your body an intention, carry forward an intention into a conversation, into an experience, into anything at all. And here you are in a very, very, I think, important, but also nuanced and subtle realm of interaction. Nothing that we can see with the eyes. It's an exciting place to be. And so it was in contemplating this way of interacting, this invisible way of interacting, that the word spirit kind of came to my mind as I was building out the body keys. It was a surprise. Up until this point, I had actually utilized the same elemental sequence that the gene keys did. It was intuitive to me, but I got stuck here up at the sixth option, the sixth line, because there was something about it that that in my experience just still felt the littlest bit off. And so here we arrive at spirit. So if it's all right, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I see in spirit, especially as it pertains to the other elements. Yeah? Okay.
That sounds great.
Okay. So what I find fascinating about spirit is that it infuses, utilizes all of the other elements. So there's something about this that is almost like, in my mind, it's almost like a spinal cord that reaches all the way down to earth and all the way up to spirit. It's this link in two directions. All of us, of course, carry this connectedness to earth and to spirit. This metaphor that I'm using to describe this sixth line spirit is actually inherent to the human being, I believe. But ultimately, for those of you who have this sixth line elemental expression in your body keys profile, what I'm indicating by this is that you are built to make use of each of the different elemental options at different times, depending upon what's needed. And so this is interesting to me. Every single one of these elements has a particular way that they express, okay? And so as an example, earth is all about sensory enjoyment. It's very rooted in the senses and in the earth qualities of our interaction with environment and with others and with our world. And so here we're dealing with the structure of the body, the bones and the musculature, right? And as you move your way up, it's becoming more and more sensitive until you arrive here at spirit. But spirit is interesting in that where earth might be focused on sensory enjoyment, here we're focused on what I like to refer to as energetic mindfulness. And what this means is that you're attuned not to the senses, not to the earth quality of the senses, not to the movements of the spine that you might find in water, but rather to all of the potential options within the context of a given space and time. And so energetic mindfulness is about being able to sense into, and here is something really exciting, being able to sense into what is energetically required by the moment at hand. This is where we come into the complexity, because it means that, someone who has earth, for instance, knows that they've got to get into the structure of their body. Boom, pretty simple. If you're up here in the head, you've got to come down into your feet, okay? But for people like both of you, your process isn't going to be quite so cut and dry. You're actually going to have a toolbox full of options available to you based on how you're feeling in the moment. And so your responsibility is actually somewhat greater in that you actually need to come into contact with the moment at hand so directly, and you need to come into contact with your own body and understanding of its needs so carefully that you're able to hear or read what it needs in that moment. And in one moment, it will need the dynamic, explosive quality of fire. And then in another moment, it might need the very relaxed quality of air, right? But to know how to feel into what your body needs in a given moment, and then how to feed it or nourish it in that moment, this is something really special. So you're very much a chameleon if you have this element of spirit. You kind of have a superpower. I like to think of it that way.
And what I love about you detailing this is it can help the sixth line spirit energy person approach their way of being strategically. So that in the moment, I know in the first tape, I described moments where I felt like I had the wind kind of knocked out of me from an engagement, and energetically. And, going through this conversation with you is helping me to understand how important in each moment it is for me to be able to assess, and then to not just perceive myself in one way as a sixth line spirit person. And so I want to give myself the homework of, in my day-to-day life, doing body checks just to figure out, an exercise, so that when I'm in a moment of emergency or a moment that has that charge to it, I'll have to develop the skill to go, oh, that's what that is. So yeah. I love that you're taking listeners and us through this process.
That's so exciting. And yes, you're spot on. You know, you've got an interesting key. Bella, before I just launch into my next thing here in response to that, I just want to check in and make sure that you're still on board. Is there anything that you have to offer before I steal the show?
I just felt this recognition too, that as a six line, you know, for many times in my life, for a long time in my life, it was easier to go to spirit, and that always felt like going out. And now, as you speak, there was something that dropped in. I'm like, it's true. It's to understand spirit is everything, right? It can traverse anything. So spirit is not confined by the body.
Yes.
It wants to be anchored in the body, but
Yes.
it's also around. That's why I can feel something. It's like I don't feel the confinement of the body, and that's always how actually it has been as a six line. That's why I have feel flooded by others too, because it's like there's another kind of, the boundaries are different for spirit. And I just realized that it kind of, again, you know, when you kind of get this aha and something relaxes in you, and it's like you stop to actually, I feel like I've been judging myself for feeling like that. And now I understand that that is how I perceive things, everything.
That's so great.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that makes so much sense for me. Now, I'm not a six line, so the best I can do is kind of observe. But based on what I've seen and based on what you've shared, that is deeply resonant for me. It's kind of like a both and thing for you. Yes, you anchor into the body as you also attune to that subtle space around you. And so this actually is a perfect segue into what I saw as Simone was speaking. And we'll apply this. Let's apply this to a body key. Let's apply it to Simone's body key of activity. This is a really easy one, especially when we're dealing with the elemental expressions. So the body key of activity serves the stuckness pattern of emotional paralysis. This is basically when we become so overwhelmed by emotion that we do not know what to do with ourselves. You're throwing that inner temper tantrum, right? So what this particular pattern is seeking is relief. And when we're dealing with an emotional drive, it's not just relief, it's release. We need to get it out. Unfortunately, what happens for most of us without awareness is when we come to this place of emotional paralysis, it gets out, but it gets out in a way that is unfortunately, to some degree, violent to the people that we most love. And it's amazing how this happens, that those closest at hand tend so often to be the ones, you know, at risk in these kind of situations. So our question is, how can we serve emotional paralysis in a way that does not affect those around us, but still allows for this release? And as a sixth line being, Simone, you have a question when you meet this emotional paralysis, when you recognize that you're all twisted up inside, right?
Mm-hmm.
So activity, activity is where you need to go, but what sort of activity? Well, as someone with an element of spirit, the reality is that you have a range of options available to you, one of which, or several of which, I suppose, are going to best serve that moment. So sometimes you'll be so wound up inside that what you really, really need to do is explode in some way. And so whether it's going for a run or exercise, or going into your car, closing the door and screaming, or like chi shaking, you know, where you get this kind of like dynamic movement, literally expending energy in a way that's controlled, in a way that is not going toward anyone, right? In a way that isn't at all violent, but still moves. That's what we're doing here. With fire in particular, we're moving the energy. So maybe that serves you, but sometimes you'll be so wound up inside that doesn't help. Sometimes you might need something way softer, whether it's quiet breathing deep into the diaphragm, and you're just slowing down, and here you're applying air, right? And you're just slowing way down and coming into the stomach and your breath and this pulse, and remembering, okay, I can breathe. You know, there isn't actually a hand around my throat right now. Sometimes you might need to put on your favorite song and dance, and now you're applying water, right? You get it? So like, and we've all been in that position where a deeply emotional moment, intense emotionality actually drives us into some form of movement or activity. And in your case, feeling into what's going to best serve that is going to be really useful. Ether, we haven't talked about ether, but ether is all about vocal expression. It's actually, we're dealing with vibration of the vocal cords. So something like humming, as simple as humming, or this surprised me, actually. This is a new discovery for me, that this fifth element of ether can actually be expressed through laughter, right?
Mm.
Through sobbing, crying, moaning, chanting, singing, all of that, right? You're going to find in particular moments, if you can be mindful of the energy of that moment, that one of those things will be the appropriate activity for you to engage in. And there's the example. It plays out differently for everyone, but as a sixth line element, this is how it's going to play out for you.
I think too, as I was listening to you, one of the things that hit me is that when I am regularly partaking in an activity, and for me it's biking, walking, dancing, or my yoga class, breathing, I'm perceiving that when I'm doing those things regularly, I'm less likely to have an emotional trauma.
Mm.
That when an event occurs, when I've kept my body running through these, I've practiced air, fire, water, and ether, then the emotional tension doesn't arise as much, or when I do experience it, it's easier to move through it.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense to me too, especially because the ultimate aim of the body keys is not as a prescriptive tool, but as a preventative one. So at first, we're developing a tool belt so that when we hit that wall of tension, we know what we can do to help soothe. But ultimately, what we're learning to do is to sustain a state of relaxation in the body.
Mm-hmm.
And each of us has a different way of doing this, but those body keys are our natural way of being in the world. And if we can practice them enough, my guess, this is all a new and developing system, and I don't think any one of us is at that place of like for all time alert relaxation. But theoretically, at the very least, as we become more and more attuned to these things and more sensitive to the world around us, we should be able to get ahead of that ball that we're constantly running behind, that ball of tension. And we should be able to sustain through our intention and through our practices and through the ways in which we're relating to the world around us. We should be able to sustain a state of relaxed awareness. So that's the most exciting ultimate end of this that I'm aiming for. I think it's at least theoretically possible.
I also like the way that you mapped that for us, that air is when we're using a breath or breathing technique, fire is an activity, dancing is water, vocal activities, or the ether, because then we can look at what we're drawn to in certain moments and understand, we can start to realize the patterns that we're facing and where we go to. Oh, well, when I was stressed like that, I went for a bike ride and I was using fire to integrate that experience or whatever. So I love that how you just track that for us, because I think it helps us build awareness to what we're actually using. Yeah.
I can do better with that as well. What you'll find is that, as I stated, the body keys is still growing up, and I'm still building around it. So one of the things that I will be building is audio contemplations on each of the different elements. I'll also be building audio contemplations on each of the different stuckness patterns, each of the body keys, and each of the gifts. But in relation to this conversation, you'll have the opportunity to learn about each of these different elements. So for someone who, like me, who has ether, they'll want to learn about that element. But someone like yourself is going to want to learn about all of them. Each of these elements has a particular frequency of expression. Again, earth was sensory enjoyment, and the sixth option is energetic mindfulness. But in addition to this, they also play out through a particular body system. They correlate to a body system. If you recall, earth was focused on the structure, the bones, and the muscles, and so on. So you'll learn about all of these different things, and for someone like you to know about all of those options is really useful.
Do you see that the endocrine system is the one for the sixth line as in the gene keys, or do you have another body system for the sixth line?
I don't have another body system for it yet. I do know that its frequency is electromagnetic, and so there's something about that that's leading me a bit beyond the endocrine system. I think we're dealing with the subtle bodies. I don't yet know which one. And what I would love actually is if through living and exploring these together, maybe we can get closer to what's happening there. Amazingly, all of the body systems match for me except for that sixth line. So I think there's still something to be seen.
This is so interesting because Richard Rudd is a sixth line, and sometimes, sometimes I just feel like that's, as a community, the Gene Keys, it's like we are still discovering the sixth line. Even Richard, that's what I feel, and that has been my urge. Maybe I've been a little bit too not pushing, it's like too intense about it because I'm so curious. So I love that. There was something else you said when we spoke about the overwhelm, is it overwhelm? No, when we spoke about, the stuckness pattern for Simone, and you were saying using the elements can make you not have to go into like an explosion, for example, or like a complete reaction. And I'm thinking, I think this has to do maybe with the thing we said the other time, that emotionals and non-emotional, and maybe the taste thing that we were like figuring out. I feel as a completely non-emotional, like having nothing in my emotional center, that when I don't do these things, the elements or the movement, I kind of feel hollow and dried out. And when I'm hollowed and dried out, I'm much more influenceable or like everything that is around me. And it feels like that leads me in also, if we would speak human design language, to my not self. So the same way an emotional person would be taken on waves that are kind of going out of order, and non-emotional, by not being in or using its element, would go into kind of not feeling ourselves and then be influenceable and being in our not self.
It's so exciting to hear you talk because it all comes together. Your body keys are totally different from Simone's. All of yours they have this very powerful individual theme. And so amazingly, where Simone's have this connection to the emotions, yours are completely disconnected from the emotions. And as a result, they tend to lose, when they're in their patterns, that stuckness pattern, they lose feeling. And so all the body keys, all three of your body keys, they allow you to regain a sense of feeling. So what you just described is totally right. If you're relaxed, aware, and absorbed in the moment, you will experience it totally. You will feel it, right? But tension, by virtue of its very nature, removes us from that sensitivity. It is our way of putting up a wall between ourselves and the world. And so in every case, it removes us from feeling. In your case, it removes you from feeling, in mine as well. In Simone's, it washes her in so much feeling that she gets stuck. It's amazing. Two totally different processes. And yet these keys, at the end of the day, are rather simple. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. There was something else that came up. It was in relation to activity. I'm just going to see if I can track it. It's right there on the edge of my little brain. If it comes back, I'll jump in, but we can move on from here.
Simone, I have another example that I thought was interesting. So for me, I realized something. I want to hear more. I want to hear more of all of them, but the fifth line in the Gene Keys, we speak about voice, right? That's the element and its frequency. And we often say, no, your leadership voice has to be heard, or you can sing, or you can tone. And I had this 3-5 client, and I usually speak to people, right? And with this person, I kind of just had to stop. And when we do a 5-minute would you be willing to do like a 5-minute inside exploration with me? And as soon as I closed my eyes, my body would start to shake like a lot, which is kind of more normal for me because it is the electromagnetic currents. That's why it's so cool that you say that. I tune into spirit and the electromagnetic current comes through. But what happened was never had happened before. I usually use air, like you would hear me kind of slap you. So you would hear the kind of bird's wings that comes with spirit. But with this person, I started like kind of what you're saying, to it wasn't really moaning, but it was kind of mooning. It wasn't singing. It wasn't.
Wow.
It was some kind of, and even a little bit of like underworld sound, like kind of deep. And I was like, it was recording everything. I'm like, I know this is kind of crazy, but I had to go there. And what I realized that the fifth line is the heretic is the person who doesn't accept the law. And the way that we've been taught to use voice in the society is always to only, use our vocal cords in a way that is trained. Like we have to speak polite, we have to sing in the tone, and it's like it's all kind of mind. It comes from the mind how we are supposed to use our chord. So I had to go out of that and use the genius of the chord that is outside that. And I just love that you say that there's like crying. There's so many ways, and actually fifth line I think can be more in your stuckness pattern by only using the chords in the way that we have been conditioned to use them. So there's something there for sure.
Yes. I believe that to be absolutely true, especially since that fifth line, that ether element, is really, it's focused on feeling as well. It's about the quality, okay, the quality of feeling. And so that person, what's interesting is that each of these different elements is going to require a certain amount of energetic mindfulness in terms of how it's going to be expressed in a moment. So in this case, laughter may be a completely different quality than sobbing, right? One may be called for, not the other. Or singing might work, whereas this kind of low moan doesn't, or vice versa. So you got to feel into it in the moment. But this theme of feeling is really important. And when you're dealing with feeling, you are dealing with the quality of an experience. So there's something there too. That's like it's. If we're dealing with a body system, I think this is an interesting one for me because you've got the nervous system. You're kind of like dealing with the whole body, and you're dealing with acoustic frequencies. And it's not just your ears that are receiving those frequencies. It's actually the whole body. It's like your whole body is made of ears. And so what I often think of is when you go to like a really good concert and they've got a good sound system and you can feel the bass like in your body and your whole, like, it's like your whole body just lights up. Even when you're not like high, it's just like, wow, there's something happening there. So anyway, feeling, this is an important one that kind of plays out to me very much like that spinal cord. It's showing up in all of them, and yet it's highlighted here in ether. And as someone with spirit, it's almost as if you get to channel the different elements. And I think that's a great part of what happened for you in the example you just shared. You were experiencing within yourself what the other person most needed. And I think if we're coming at it from a human design perspective and we're looking at the sixth line and the way that it's always looking beyond, you're kind of dealing in the realm of the next version of human being. You're experiencing the other in a way that is beyond our typical modes of communication. And so I think that's what you're tapping into as well. It's pretty exciting. I did remember what I was going to say just now, actually.
Well, that made me again kind of heal something, because I've been so hard on myself. Like, why do I always see the potential? Why do I always concentrate on the potential, although everything is showing me that that's not going to happen? But the sixth line, we have the vision, and to be hard on myself because I keep the vision is inherent. Spirit holds the vision. The sixth line holds the future. Yes. So it's like, oh my God, it's like, I feel like I don't have to judge myself so hard because it's inherent and it's beautiful too.
Right.
Well, and when you ground it like you initially said, then what you're able to do is you're able to hold this vision, and you can call it a romantic ideal. You could pretend it's rose-colored glasses, whatever. You've got this best possible view, but you can root it in the reality. And so now you're able to maintain perspective. You don't lose yourself to these possibilities that cause you to become vulnerable. You're able to ground it in a more realistic perspective without losing sight of its ultimate potential. And I think that's a really important place to be, because our reality is never the for all time truth. And a lot of people get stuck in that direction. We find people stuck in both directions. You're someone who can master this quality of maintaining both positions and living forward into the greatest possibility. I think that's just gorgeous, very exciting to think about.
Beautiful.
Yeah. The one point that I forgot about earlier and wanted to make now about activity in particular for you, Simone, is that when we're dealing with this body key of activity, really what we're dealing with is being completely absorbed in a moment. So I went back and forth for a long time on this body key, whether I was going to call it absorption or activity. The reason I didn't call it absorption is because, well, it's because I built this whole system on the question of, could a child understand it? And a child would not understand what I meant by absorption. But between us and anyone listening, I want you to understand that activity isn't just doing something. It's becoming so absorbed in an activity that you lose sight of anything else that might have been happening outside of it. And this is the very thing that allows us to get ahead of tension. And it's actually the ultimate key of them all from my perspective, because they're all embodied, they're all activities. In fact, I refer to the body keys as embodied activities. So here we have the very foundation of the body keys. They're all some variation on activity. And when we can absorb ourselves in that activity, what are we doing? We're becoming present. We're remembering where we are. We're coming back into the body. And it's that very simple activity of becoming present that allows us to relax and remember the truth. That's it. It's super simple on that level. So if we want to get ahead of tension, we become present.
So, you know, the person who gardens or the person who embroiders, or when you were saying that, I paint, and I know when I paint, I'm completely absorbed.
Yes.
You know, so really any activity that is almost becomes a meditation.
Yes, there it is.
So present right there.
That's exactly right. And think about painting for you. Let's look at painting. Do you mind if we do this? I know we're just following.
Yeah, totally.
Okay. So you have 3 body keys: activity, organization, and nurture. Activity is very focused on the feeling quality. In fact, its sensor is something that I call feeling sight. You know, it's about the quality of feeling a moment, or the ability to feel the quality of a moment, however you want to say that. Organization is about the visual aesthetic. And nurture is all about textures and scent. So let's look at something like painting for you. Oh my goodness, talk about the perfect synthesis activity. You've got the smell of the paint, the textures of the paints and the medium. You've got everything happening there. It's such a simple thing, and you've been doing it for so long. So you kind of want to shrug your shoulders and be like, what's the big deal? Well, it's a key. Yeah, it's a doorway.
Painting has just come to me in the last 6 months. I've never painted.
Incredible.
And yet I just, you know, was driven to paint, and it's been incredible for me.
It's perfect. It reminds me of Bella's story last time about laying on the couch in that private moment and putting on some music and just kind of like rubbing your stomach. Boom. We do these things. We know what works. The problem is when we get in the way and we argue with it. And Bella, the argument will be, well, I shouldn't withdraw. You know, I shouldn't go into a private space. That's rude, or whatever story, you know, and we each have these stories. But when we allow the body to get what it's after, and it is always going to tell us, and boy, does it ever when we ignore it, right? When we allow it to kind of serve those moments and to soothe itself in the ways that it knows to, we become very surprised at how good we are at this to begin with. Yeah.
Beautiful. I like that you were able to even identify the story she'll tell herself, because even just knowing that, you know, you can put two and two together. Okay, I'm telling myself, you know, the internal noises, I'm isolating, but I'm actually doing something to reground in my body and soothe, you know, in a certain way. So, you know, it's great. It's all of that is great.
Well, you're making me feel really smart, but I promise you it's not quite that. Part of it is that I share those keys with Bella, and so they're very personal for me. Yeah. Cool. Another part of it is that the pattern that they're serving to soothe is compromise, and compromise comes up from guilt. You feel guilty, and as a result of this guilt, you've made yourself smaller than you are. And when does this happen most? It happens in relation to other people's expectations. And so you can imagine yourself in a social setting, and your compromise in that moment may in fact be staying in the social setting. And your body's like, I got to get out of here. And you're like, no, that's not appropriate. You know, you can only argue with that for so long. What happens if you stay? You become more and more compromised, more and more tense, and less nice to be around. The right thing for everyone is for you to find that space for yourself so that you can regain composure and come back in your own sovereignty. And that's the gift on the other side of this. Now when you show up to impact. And that impact is beautiful, not uncomfortable. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
I mean, I'm curious about the other elements, because we have the sensory enjoyment for the first line, and we have the energetic mindfulness for the sixth line. I don't know, was it feeling? I'm not sure if you really share the keyword, but I'm kind of, I mean, if that's not too much to give away today,
No,
I'm like
that's
really
great.
curious.
Let's do that. This will become a really fun reference conversation for people as well. I really hope it does. There's no such thing as giving too much away. I want everyone to have access to this information. So let's do that. The first element is earth. This is the most grounded element. It's held in its location. I refer to it as location. The body system that it's focusing in is structure. The location is the structure of the body, the muscles and the bones. Its frequency is sensory enjoyment. So we've got this one down. When we take one step up, we're looking at water. Now, water is all about the spine. We're dealing with flexibility now, flexibility of the spine, the spinal fluids. And this is why we talk about dance. And each of these has examples of like how they can be put to use. But for now, let's just stick on the high level of like which body system they're serving and what their expression looks like. And the expression in this case is movement. We're dealing with expressive movement. So you have sensory enjoyment. You've got expressive movement here in water. So you can get a sense for that. And I think the two of you, it's fun talking with you, because I think you're gonna have a little like aha for every one of these elements, because I'll bet you've used every one of them at times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So fire. Fire is an exciting one. I don't have fire, but I have explored it, in an embodied way, and it's just a fun one to live inside of. In fact, I must segue to a minor story. So there was a period of time where I was training in a form of martial arts called 10 Animals Boxing Kung Fu. And I always like to say that because it just sounds cool, doesn't it? And so I was learning these different forms, and each form was related to an animal. That alone was so much fun, but as you learn the forms, there were these different ways that you could express the forms. And so you would run the form as earth. And when you ran it as earth, you would tense every muscle in the body. And as you were moving through this form, every muscle was flexed. Extremely exhausting, and so your body would be shaking, like, you're like a rock, right? And it's very fun to do that. And then water would be very fluid and as soft and as fluid as you can be without any break in, you really want to remember all your joints. And then fire would be this, you take this deep breath in and then you'd explode, with the end of each form. And you move through all these different elements. We're doing the same thing here, we're doing the same thing here. And fire has the point of telling that story is because fire was always the most fun. There's this like about it, and you get that. So its expression is dynamic exertion. You can imagine how this applies to activity, a dynamic exertion of some form of activity. Oh yeah. You get a focus here on the blood. We're dealing with the cardiovascular system. This is all about getting the blood moving through the body. You want to feel the heat in the body. And so circulate, get that energy moving. You're going to get the energy moving in all these different ways, but earth is a much slower movement. There's a certain amount of control to it. There's a lot of control in water as well. There's just this like explosive quality to fire. It's very exciting. So dynamic exertion and the blood. The fourth option is air. And here we're dealing with rhythmic engagement. So we're coming closer to the world around us. Those first three are very personal, and you get a sense for that. But now we're starting to engage with the space around us a bit more. I love you shaking your head, Bella, because you see how this connects to.
It's too genius. I'm dying because like I had like the first trigram and the second trigram, and like I'm thinking about the SQ now. Rhythm and certainty. Right. The first line SQ, and the fourth line builds on that first line. So of course it's rhythmic engagement because the fourth line is a transpersonal. Like it makes so much sense. I'm just like, no, it's too genius to be true.
Oh, that's so exciting for me to hear, because I had the same excitement as it was moving through me. Like, oh man, it just, everything connects. Oh, you're the first person, I think, to really see it from that more technical perspective. Very fun.
Sorry, I just had to explode. The fire came through me. I just had to say it.
Good. Yeah, and I do hope that there are some listeners who are on that same kind of like technical level, and they're like, I get it. Very good. So yeah, 4 is breath. air. It's about the respiratory system, but it's not just about breathing. It's about sharing breath. Inhalation and exhalation, we're constantly taking in and contributing to the world around us. And so there is a very, very spiritual quality of engagement that plays out here. If it were possible to draw like tangible distinctions between these different elements, you know, we're dealing with kind of a metaphorical value in our conversation, but if you could make it distinct, you'd be hard pressed to find much of a difference looking at it between air and spirit. They're very similar in the way that they kind of like breathe or interact with the world around. So that's exciting for me to see as well. Ether, here we're dealing with vocal tone. And I wondered about connecting this to vocalization so directly, but there's no way to get around it when you're dealing with the vocal cords, you know, and when we're specifically vibrating this throat element, at first, again, I felt like it was too pointed. We're dealing with the vocal cords. Is that it? It's not it. What does this represent? What does the throat, if we open it up to like the idea of the throat chakra, right? Or even the throat center in human design, man, this is all about the release of our honest truth. This is all about manifestation. This is how we make things real. Our ideas become reality as we voice them. It's not just about vibrating the vocal cords. This is about becoming alive. I mean, and honestly, even as I speak this, I'm getting chills. And so there's the feeling, you know, this is precisely what's happening. We can sense truth through this ether element. I find that really useful in my own exploration of this material as well. And so here we're dealing with feeling and vibration and the nervous system.
And the key word would be vocal, like what's the key word?
Vocal tone.
Vocal tone, okay.
Yeah, so it's a vocal expression and it's tonal in its quality, okay? And the reason I like tone, of course, those of you who are familiar with human design understand that there's like deep relevance to that word tone within that context, and I do intend that for the nerdy ones among us. But from this more, I think, practical level, there's a tonal quality. We're dealing with quality, you know, and again, it's a low rumble deep in the throat, like a Buddhist chanting, is going to feel different and serve a particular moment differently than, you know, a higher vibrato singing, you know, like we have to feel into those differences. The tonal quality matters, and expressing it through the vocal cords is something that we can all do. In fact, I don't know that there is a human being without that ability. There might be. You know, I wonder about my grandmother who had, I forget what it's called. You know, she had cancer and so had a hole, you know, cut in her neck. I forget what it's called. I don't know why it's evading me, but I don't know how she would have done this. She couldn't speak, you know, but maybe she could hum. It's going to be the sort of thing that each person in their own individual way of feeling this out is going to make use of it. I think in time, we're going to find that there may be some special exceptions.
When you were describing it, I had this vision of native drummers, of drumming, and that, you know, that rumbling when drummers are drumming, and then they'll start to chant, and it's got this real kind of guttural earth vibration to it.
Yes. There it is. See, this is why these conversations are so powerful. You just helped to answer the question that arose in the moment that it arose. That's exactly it. The nervous system is what we're dealing with here. So though it's expressing through the vocal cords, we're actually dealing with the body's ability to sense the world, especially the acoustic world around it, through the skin. Mentioned earlier that it's like the nervous system or the skin is made up of a bunch of ears. So that's exactly it. We're actually able to feel these frequencies with the whole body. We're activating them consciously in our application of these body keys with the throat, but ultimately the greater expression is probably a whole body hum. Very interesting.
And so, because as you were talking, just as you started to talk about your grandmother, I was like, oh, and there's some people who have an open throat center. They don't really perceive themselves as users of the voice, but there are other ways. There are instruments, there's percussion, there's drumming, just being in in a vehicle. When you're in a car, sometimes
Yes.
you get that
Story.
exactly, and you have that whole sense of it. So somebody who doesn't really maybe voice, who doesn't play an instrument or drum a drum, they might go for a drive in their car so that they can hear or feel that vibration in their bodies.
That's great. Yeah, I think there's deep relevance to that. I think that could play out.
Mm-hmm.
And Timothy, there's something you said about others also, and that made me think about, so the new sphere in the star pearl, the Saturn activation, the fifth line is coherence, and it's about how can I best adapt myself to bring about the maximum flow in this situation. There was something you said about adaptation of tone that made me really think about that line in the fifth line on the stability.
That sentence you just read is like the perfect tagline.
Okay.
In this case, it's a conversation with the body. What do you need? Like, what is it that's gonna allow for this tightness to catch its breath again? And how can I regain my center? What do I need? So this is opening up a lot of really good stuff. Thank you both.
Yeah, and I love the thing that, we are seeing the fifth line. Of course, now we're speaking about this body spheres, but like that's the thing, the line, that's why going back to the hexagram lines, there's something so magic with that, because it's so hologenetic. Like wherever we look and there's a fifth line, it has that, it's really connected to all the fifth lines. And I love that.
Yes. Yeah. That genetic continuity for those human design nerds out there. Yeah, really, really great stuff. Last time we spoke, I know we're pressing up to our hour point here, but I wanted to thank you both, because the last time we spoke, we identified new things. I mean, I'm coming to you with excitement over this system that is being built, but you're helping to contribute to it through these conversations. It's happened again today. So I'm very grateful.
So maybe this is a good time to wrap it up. Right? Yeah.
Probably. There were 3 things that we were excited to address, and we managed to discuss one of them. So I guess we'll have to come back again.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us. And if you want to connect with Timothy, you can connect with him at timothybrainerd.com and check out the awesome body keys. And Bella, our extraordinaire human design gene key ambassador, the 64 doors, the living matrix goddess extraordinaire. So
and where do we find you, Simone? I want to know where we can find you.
Yeah.
SimoneGers.com.
Okay. We'll make sure we have the links as well. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.